Okay, welcome to Hopeifiers. My name is the Acapellist. I'm here with Brother Scott Sweetman, and we have an amazing episode for you today. As you can see, I have a little bit of a different location. I am broadcasting from the horse trailer in Red Deer. So this is at the Westerner Park in Red Deer. My bride Corolla is doing some horse riding competitions in reining. So here we are. Welcome, Brother Scott. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great tonight. That arena is very familiar to me back in my horse showing days, and I've ate and slept and showed in that exact place. Well, maybe not exactly where you are. That looks like something new they're building, but yeah, the Westerner that's been there for a very long time.
It's
Not
a
in its
pretty
current
it's a
form, but
pretty impressive place, actually. They do a really good job of it. It's very well run.
it services a big community area there, so it's really
It
good.
does.
How's
So,
Corolla doing this show?
well, we always come here early, and then she has some practice runs she does, and then
Right.
today she had her first run, competition run here about an hour ago or 45 minutes ago, and then she did pretty well. She got a decent solid score. It was a very challenging run, and the judges are really hard today, so it might even be where she places. She could. So we'll see.
And this is unsolicited and maybe not even unwanted, but my daughters have taken some lessons from Corolla, and I've seen Corolla ride a lot. And as I've talked on the show a lot, I grew up on a ranch where we bred and showed horses, and Corolla is fantastic with horses. If there's anyone that has some questions, Corolla's really passionate about animals and their welfare. People too, of course. Both Al and Corolla are like the big famous couples you see on TV that care about people and the community they're in and around them. All joking aside, but it's true. So if you're a horse person or interested in horses and you get a chance to talk to Corolla about it, yeah, take the opportunity. She's a great wealth of information, and I
She
know
is.
in our work we're always if we get a chance to bounce an idea off Corolla, we do. So she's great with opinions that can help make things better for people and animals, and a lot of health information too, right? She's sort of where your veganism started. Am I
Oh,
right in
she's
that?
like
Or-
super, super well researched on nutrition, like up to doctor status, like level kind of a
Yeah,
thing, right? She really knows her stuff. So
yeah,
yeah,
and that's important. I think that
yeah.
that should be one of the jobs. They used to. I know when I was in high school, we had to take. They called it home ec,
Oh yes,
which I think that's not politically correct anymore. But we were one of the first classes where boys had to take home ec and girls had
nice,
to take shop. And I think
nice.
they've made those names more politically correct. But
Yes, I think they have.
yeah, the expectation for the boys was not very high. We had to learn how, and of course we played it up, right? We burnt
Yeah,
everything, and we
exactly.
acted
That's
like
right.
idiots, right? But most being farm kids, most of us could feed ourselves in a
I'm
pinch anyway. But
I'm not going to say that men do this intentionally, but there are some men that have kind of a learned incompetence, so that women just take over, right? So, oh, forget it. You're going to screw it up. I'll just do it.
yeah, blow up one egg in the microwave, and pretty much you don't ever have to cook again, right?
You're done. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
That's right.
you're done. So
Yeah.
cool.
Okay.
And that's a kind of a rough segue into tonight's topic. This is part two of a three-parter, right, Al? This
Yes.
is our first official three-parter. We've
Yes.
done it before, but this is sort of our first one, and we're going to be talking next week about what you can do about a topic that, for me, was the first time I'd actually heard it given a name. Had you heard it? Have you heard the term eco grief before? Last
I
show
had
out?
never heard of eco grief until you mentioned just a few minutes ago. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you're
it
telling me as well that like Alberta is like the epicenter for epigrief research and best practices. Yeah.
I was blown out of the water, actually. I don't know if anyone uses that saying anymore. I was shocked, surprised, amazed at how much Canada is involved in eco grief and its effect on mental health, and the phenomenon or the reality of eco grief and how it affects uh, people worldwide. And one big research center is the University of Calgary. And I'll be posting up some links to some of their stuff. And if you go look at the University of Calgary, search eco-grief, it'll come up in the search if you look at a few of the entries. But you can certainly search eco-grief in the University of Calgary and it will come up. Another big...
That's
Sorry?
next week, right, Scott? Eco-grief is
Yeah,
next
well,
week.
no, we're going to talk about eco-grief and children this week,
Okay.
what the effects of eco-grief are. And next week, we're going to talk about what you can do about it, and why or people that may not even realize they're suffering from some eco-stress can deal with that. So I was just going to say that another place to look is the Canadian Climate Institute, and they have some great publications about it. They have an article that came out last year, July of last year, pardon me, July 10th. Eco-grief, the mental toll of climate emergency. And that's sort of what our topic is tonight, about how we think of climate change and climate disasters as being really physical in their devastation. But to my surprise, there's been a lot of research into the very real mental impact of these disasters on worldwide level. And so when I started to look into that for last week's show, there was a lot of articles about children and how actually devastating the whole discussion is around climate change and eco disaster on children, and what that looks like, and how it's affecting the children around us. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And excellent. How that fits into hope is because there's some hope in that. And let me give you an example why. So I was reading a very interesting article in the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Review. It's a publication. It's available online. It was put out as a special issue November 1st of 2022. Nope, that's not right. Number 1, 2022, I'm sorry. This year, anyway, the first publication of this year has an article on ecological awareness, anxiety, actions among youth and their parents, a quantitative study of narratives. And so what it was looking at is how, if you turn on the news, there's almost always a story about some eco disaster somewhere, or discussions, arguments, demonstrations about climate change. And children are often very much at the beginning of this. Can you think of examples of youth in the media concerning climate change?
Well, Greta Thunberg, is that her name was?
The
gal, From where is she from? Sweden or something? Is that, I think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I've only seen a little bit of her. She was obviously a very, very passionate young person who, very cares about the future of our planet and of our humanity. So, she was, I thought, for such a young person to be so eloquent and so passionate, I think it's amazing, right? I've never met her or know anything more about her than that. I just saw a little bit of her, but yeah.
Well, it was very controversial, especially here in Alberta, because of our energy sector. There were things said by people associated with her that were pretty negative about our oil sands and our oil production. And, we're not really interested in getting into a debate about fossil fuel and those things. I don't think anyone can argue that there's a harmful component of their production and use to the environment, or that we obviously need to do better. But we're not at the stage right now where we could just switch to renewable resources. Like, there has to be a bridging that goes on, obviously, and I think we're in that state of discussion now about what that would look like. But going back to Greta, the media projects youth and adolescence and climate issues in one of 4 ways, according to this article, and I'm just going to read this so that I get it right. So they're either depicted as demanding activists, which Greta would fall into that, Adultified minors. And that's where, children are interviewed, they're treated like adults at the scene of an oil spill or something like that. And they're asked really sophisticated adult level questions about what's happened and what's been affected by the disaster or etc. They're depicted often as innocent victims. And the last one is where hope sort of comes into this, and that's as ultimate saviors. And so often we talk about how our generation is the cause of what's happened in the generations before us. And there's a lot of pressure being put on, a lot of hope, a lot of pressure being put on the next generation to actually deal with a lot of these issues. And so that puts us in a really interesting position. How do you feel about those four depictions of youth? Do they fit your? I know that you work in Big Brothers, and you work with youth a lot. Um, Probably, and I don't know, maybe this topic has never come up, but can you think of examples of kids in these roles? Or
Well, kids today, like a 12-year-old today kind of thing, is a far more of a complete human being than I was a 12-year-old boy.
that's
Because
a
when I
good
was
way
a
to put it.
12-year-old
Yeah.
boy, I certainly wasn't anywhere concerned about anything that didn't serve me. Whatever I could get, or things that I needed, or things like a selfish, like a child. Children are focused internally, right? That's kind of where we start, right? Yeah, that's
Should
how
be.
it
Yeah.
works. And
Yeah.
so I think it's just amazing how people that young develop so much maturity, that a maturity and also an other focus, that they're less concerned about them and meeting their needs, and more about others and of the health and welfare of our planet, right? I think that's beautiful that people that young have that drive, that kind of a focus. I know I did not when I was at that age, right? I would be thinking about whatever, getting beer, stuff like that. But,
Well, I grew up in a farm, and we were a little more aware of it because our livelihood came from the ground and from
right.
living animals that came off that. But it certainly wasn't in a global sense, more of a
No.
regional sense, a more localized, certainly. But your definition or your description was perfect. Because when we look at what eco grief is, and I had to look it up because I mean, it's one of those terms that should seem self-evident, but it kind of leaves you wondering, is that right? Or is it more than just feeling bad about, the ecosystem? So a definition, or the sort of standard definition of eco grief, refers to the sense of loss that arises from experiencing or learning about environmental destruction or climate change. Environmental grief can be defined as grief reaction stemming from the anticipated or actual ecological losses, includes loss of species, ecosystems, meaningful landscapes due to the acute or chronic environmental change. So that's a really long-winded definition, but I think that you can see a lot of that happening. So with, Spider-Man's famous line that with, great power comes great responsibility. And that is true in knowledge too, I think. And like you said, you and I, our age largely, was concerned about things in our sort of immediate area, and the things we had to worry about was, do we have enough pocket money for the movie? Can we take somebody out on a date? Is dad going to find out, I took the truck without his permission? Those were kind of our stressors, right?
You bet.
So what's happening?
Very self-centered, or very self-focused, right? And that's not a criticism, that's just the reality of somebody. As a young person, you are more self-absorbed, more self-centered, right? That's kind of how it works, right? And then ultimately, I think you become where you kind of start thinking about others more, or focus on others, when you get to a stage where your needs are mostly or fully like met, right? When you then then you focus on other people. I think that's an exceptional where people whose needs are not met are focused on other people's needs. I know Alvin, I mentioned that Blackfoot man, my friend Alvin Mills. Well,
Yes.
I know people that met him the first time he's met him, he's advocating for getting people into houses and that kind of thing. Well, while he's doing that, he's living in intent, right? So
Mhm.
just like that's, I think, very odd where somebody who, will go out of their way to get somebody else's needs met when their needs are not met, right? I think kind of the normal transition is you get your needs met and then, you can be of value and can extend to others, kind of a thing, right? So does that make sense?
And it does completely. But I think what we're looking at here is that, I can remember one climatic event that caused me trauma, and I can remember it so clearly. And my parents were divorced when I was 6, so I would have only been 4 or 5 years old when this happened. And I remember the entire scene. We were living in a little trailer that was in my grandparents' yard. They lived in the big house, and it started. My mom and dad were there in the yard coming in from the day's work. My brother was there, I was there, and the dark clouds came rolling in, and my parents were really nervous. And as a kid, you could tell, when your parents get nervous, even if they're not saying something, you can tell something's up. And it started to rain, and then it started to hail, and we ran under the big overhead porch of my grandparents' house, and the hailstones were like golf balls, and it
Ooh.
just pounded. Like my grandmother's lilac tree in the yard, like most farmhouses, we had a purple lilac tree in the yard, or a mountain ash. It was sort of, I think, obligated to have one or the other on most farmhouses in Alberta. And that I just remember that when it was over, there was no leaves, no flowers, nothing left on this tree. Branches were broken, grass was all mashed, and both my parents were crying. And you know, I understood from their conversation, which obviously was directed at each other, not us, that the crops were ruined, and that this was really, 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 really bad for us, and that we were in trouble because of this one event that lasted 10 or 15 minutes. And of course, I didn't understand it really well at that time, obviously, but I understood that this climatic event had caused something horrible to happen to my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I still get, whenever it hails, I still get really tense and nervous, and I'm like, oh, let's find a place to put the truck in out of the hail. And I get really anxious about it. And I think a lot of it stems to that one event. And as you said, I didn't really know about forest fires across the world, or things like that, but that one
So
climatic
Scott, you
event.
were you were about 4 then, you said, right?
4 or 5, because my parents were divorced at 6, and they were together,
Yeah.
and they hugged each other when it was hailing. So things were obviously, they were together still then. So
Right.
yeah,
And that for you then created a lot of fear in young Scott. Would that be that
it
that's what
did.
happens? Fear and
Trauma
anxiety. And
for sure. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
That makes sense.
I'm not, obviously there's much worse things that have happened to people, but I am saying that in the context you said of being very, isolated, and more concerned about ourselves and our immediate family, and if we're lucky, our grandparents or aunts and uncles, or neighbors that were immediately around us, our sense of concern didn't extend much beyond that, right?
Right.
But now kids are exposed to daily bombardments, and in the classroom. And this is one of the interesting things that was brought up in this article, is that how do we teach about the effects of both, acute climate problems, like things that happen, big forest fires that occur, oil slicks, those types of things. Teach about the issues of climate change, not necessarily promoting one way or the other, but talking about what the issues are. And I imagine these are, things that are more talked about in junior high and high school, but certainly they crop up everywhere. Is I know how much stress I felt from that one instance in my childhood. And I think I understand a bit how this has become a real issue, because one of the examples they give when you search examples of eco grief, it talks about the big forest fires in when did that occur? 20, the ones in Australia that went
Yeah.
on and on and on, and they could see the
Yeah.
smoke halfway around the world. And
I think
it
it was
was
2018.
2018. Yeah,
I think.
that sounds about right. And it cited that as one example where children all over the world, it was discussed in classrooms, it was impacting, all sorts of things. I remember when the volcanoes in Iceland or Iceland. Yeah, I remember when they erupted and it stopped air traffic in Europe for 4 or 5 days, up to a week in some places. It had all of this impact and things. People were talking about its impact on the growing cycle and crops. So I think that most of us can probably understand how the exposure to this information is both good, necessary, could be our only hope of making a better future, but is causing a lot of trauma and stress in young people that may not be equipped to deal with it. It causes a lot of mental health issues in adults, and there's you mentioned Calgary. That's one of the areas that they're researching in Calgary is the effects of eco grief on mental health, the direct correlation. And they find that there are direct correlations to it. Do you find yourself more anxious or feel that extra stress when you hear about climate events or climate change?
That's a very good question. I think I kind of have a little bit of kind of a selective. I'm not going to think about this. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I sort of, for climate type things, I'm doing the things that I know are the right things that I can and am willing to do. Let's put it that way. And then after that, I can't really, I guess I don't, I sort of think this is somebody else's problem to solve this. Smarter people, me, need to do this. Here's the part that I can do. I can recycle. I can, use less fuel. I can take less trips. I can eat more plant-based foods, which that is a huge thing in terms of the intensity of animal protein production and the environmental impacts. That's a thing, right? So,
Yeah.
and so, but other than that, you kind of just like stand and watch these bizarre weather things that are occurring at an increasing rate, right? And you say, yeah, this ain't right. This is not just a cycle. This, to me, anyways, I don't know what your thoughts are, but these are things that definitely we as humans have input on what is happening with our weather patterns, right? I believe that to be the case for sure. You don't. Others don't. They say, no, that's crazy. It's just a pattern. And we just haven't lived long enough to see this pattern. But I don't think so. Like, I think the people that are smarter about it know what's going on, know that we as humans need to make changes in how we treat our earth, right?
I think your answer, though, sort of shows that, well, you don't have selective listening. You
Okay.
obviously have thought about this and you've taken action, right? So
Yeah,
how you deal with it is you actually take action within what you feel is your ability to take action, right?
exactly.
You're not out marching in parades and doing those things, but you're definitely saying, here's what I do. You're not afraid to say to people, I believe this, and take action. Part of that is because you're free as an adult to do as you choose,
True.
largely, right?
Yeah.
But when we think about young people, they
If
don't have
Corolla
that.
lets me.
Yeah, I was going to add that in there, and then I thought that I may pay for that later. So, yeah,
That's fine.
no, Corolla's not like that. We're joking. Corolla's very kind,
No.
and
Yeah,
she
she's a
doesn't.
sweet woman. Really.
She forgives Al his Alness and
And
me
that's a
my Scott.
full-time job, as you might imagine, Scott.
I can imagine. The acapellist is an amazing person, but I think that you would really have to be Corolla to know what the full experience, the full acapella experience is. So,
Woman she has the patience of a saint, that woman.
yes. But going back to our topic, and the Climate Institute of Canada, this is I'm talking about what the head researcher there has published and is talking about. And so we're talking about the effects on youth. But he points, just a second, I have a technical difficulty. I have a wardrobe malfunction
Oh my
that,
goodness.
oh, that would help.
Are you going to interview Janet Jackson about it later on and compare notes about your?
Yeah, I think so. I had my head, no wonder I was talking backwards. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're fine. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, they were falling out of my head because they were in backwards. So we were talking about the effects of children,
Yeah.
and he brings up the point that indigenous, black, racialized people around the world disproportionately face climate impacts.
Yeah.
Many find that climate research is often focused on economic costs alone, which is too narrow and doesn't address the needs of those who are experiencing it on the front lines. And that really made me stop and think. So a lot of the people, like a lot of the debate I hear, are from upper middle class white people that live in modern societies and could move if the water levels rose and aren't dependent off subsistence farming or subsistence animal husbandry. And those people are not necessarily the people that are feeling the first effects of, whether it's something we've created or whether it's a natural pattern. The people that we just mentioned are the people that are feeling the brunt of it, right? When we look at not only acute topics but longer term things, it is those people that indigenous communities, people that have been racialized, people that are on the economic margins, that are really bearing the brunt of this.
Hey, this is a little off topic, but do you know who Steve Donziger is?
I've heard the name. Have you mentioned him
So
before?
he is an environmental lawyer, and he challenged Chevron because I can't remember where this was. I think it was in Brazil, if I recall correctly. But basically, Chevron took one chunk of land to make their exploration, and just polluted like the waters horrendously for like a million other people, right? And of course, they're all like indigenous people. They got no options. They can't go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And they have to drink the water that's there, and the water's polluted. Cancer rates are going up crazy. Everything's going off the roof. Very, very clear that they caused it. So then he goes and he challenges them on this. And this is a bizarre thing. Somehow the U.S. federal government allows Chevron to apply the penalty for interference against this Steve Donziger guy. So basically, in the end, he spends 993 days in jail.
What?
Yes, he just got out of jail after 993 days. And why? Because Chevron basically put him in jail because he was a pain in the ass to them.
Wow.
And they're just like abusing people. And why are they abusing those people? Because they're poor people and they can't do nothing about it, right? That's the reality of it. So, yeah, it's very, very unfair, sad, amazing, and amazing that the federal government would just say, yeah, big oil can take care of this stuff. They don't, shut down these lawyers that are causing so much grief, right? So bizarre.
Oh, that's what, it's not off topic, because that's what Dr. Consolo from the Canadian Climate Institute, that's exactly what he's saying. And, using his words rather than mine, is how the talk about climate change looks at climate devoid from human responsibility, devoid from settler colonization and global capitalism. Most of the literature is very much still white-censored scholarship. And there's no talk about how the silence from these groups benefits who? Big companies, etc. Exactly like you're saying. It's when people start speaking out that it affects the bottom line of companies like Chevron. And I've got nothing against Chevron. I grew up in Alberta. Lots of my family has made its livelihood off of oil and gas and those things. So I'm like you in the sense that it's not, in me, it's not a, saying this is good or bad. I'm saying the reality is not sustainable, whatever it is, and we need to look at alternatives. And I don't think many people can argue that, a model that was based from 60 to 80 years ago is the best one we can apply today, right? So
Right. Yep.
There has
Yep.
to be better models, whichever side of the debate you're on. I don't think anyone can argue that we have resources to make things better that we didn't have 60, 80 years ago. But
Exactly.
the reality is that we're not including the people who are really feeling the biggest brunt of it. And they're not the people that are in the conversation. And as you just pointed out, often when people at a grassroots level try and get involved, they're kept out of the conversation for economic or power or political reasons.
Yeah.
So I think that if you're interested in the topic, that people should look into that. It's very, very interesting. I think it's relevant to a lot of the other things that we're talking about in society today in terms of Aboriginal rights and the things that have gone on and still go on because of colonization and that global reality. And as a historian, I'm cognizant that the white European colonization of basically the whole world was not the first instance of colonization. It probably will not be the last, and there's lots of reasons why. And it's not all evil, but there's certainly people that are victimized because of that, and their experience is far from good. So I think trying to understand that all of its context is always good. But going back to eco grief, just so we can understand a little bit better, it's basically broken into 4 types when we're talking about mental health. The first is grief from acute disasters, wildfires, flooding, etc. And this is very easy to prove. The rates of PTSD in the area where that occurs skyrocket. And there is research on this. Al, you okay?
Yeah. I'm fine.
You,
Can you hear me still?
oh, yep, yep. Oh, you and I are having all kinds of equipment issues tonight. So yeah, and so there's a lot of long-term anxiety and a lot of long-term mental health that occurs in areas where these acute situations have occurred. And 10, 20 years later, scientists are still recording significant negative impact on mental health in communities where these things have happened.
Australia, back to those wildfires, us knowing that that was such a huge thing, and then COVID, and then like all the things that Australians were facing there, they invested heavily in EMDR practitioners. So basically
Really?
saying this is because EMDR is kind of like the tool for a PTSD, right? Is kind of the proven thing that, and if you got to talk to a guy like Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he's like, I don't understand why, but it works. So use it, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
anyways, but yeah, so they really invested in EMDR practitioners to help with the huge, overwhelming anxiety and suffering that people were going through with, just COVID was enough for everybody, but they had way more than COVID, right? In addition, right? So, yeah.
Well, and I think that the question that comes out right away here is, why are a couple of guys who are into hope and happiness talking about all this grief and anxiety? And I think that hope and happiness and mental health and well-being, all the things the Hopeifiers wish for and hope for and champion as much as we can, is that some of these things we have to face, and some of the issues that are impacting our hopefulness and our happiness and our mental health aren't fun to talk about. And part of the reason they've existed for so long, like sexual abuse, like domestic abuse, sexual domestic abuse, and on, is because people have been silent about them. They weren't things you could talk about. And if you talked about them, there was something wrong with you. You were a bad person, and you became the problem. And so hopefully we've grown out of that and we can talk about these things. So
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
and you can't argue with the fact there's tons of scientific proof that when big wildfires or flooding happen, that people, and I've been in 5 like national level natural disasters in my life. I'm bad news, I guess. I've been in flash floods, I've been in earthquakes, nuclear meltdowns, crazy stuff. And it definitely impacts the people there. But what they're finding out is that it also impacts people globally, because now with the media, the way it works, everything that happens everywhere, you and I hear about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I chuckle because I'll hear a story about, somebody saving a kitten in El Salvador or something. And it's like, oh, that's cool, it's cute, but why am I in Lethbridge? Why does my news cycle include somebody saving a kitten in El Salvador? Um, it's funny, but the truth is that's how media works nowadays, and the good and the bad get spread. So there's a lot of proof that that's happened. The second type of grief is slow onset changes, loss of ice, shifts over time, and that's sort of like old age and death, and the anxiety lots of people feel about getting older, and they know death is coming eventually. And so people, and we know it's not an uncommon type of grief, right? People start to mourn that slow progression and loss. I remember as a kid, one of our neighbors that we used to call Uncle, just because that was the convention of the time, was leaned up against an arbitrage truck, or a meat wagon, as we used to call it, where they would come out and pick up carcasses of animals that had died. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, son," he said, "you got to learn if you're going to be in the ranching business. If you've got livestock, you're going to have dead stock."
Yeah.
And I don't know how old I was at the time, and I was sort of, whoa. But that's true. I mean, that's the natural order of things. If things are alive, eventually they're not going to be alive. And we have to deal with that long-term transition. So scientists are saying that a lot of people suffer from that feeling that the world is, going to hell in a handbasket slowly, but still we're heading to, I know that every time I hear somebody say that, in billions of years the sun's going to go cold and we're all going to die, I find that a little depressing, because I love life, and the idea that all life is going to cease in the universe. Physicists say that eventually the universe is going to stop expanding, that there's a minute amount of energy loss over time. That's kind of depressing, right? The idea that all the beauty and wonder of life and creation might at some point physically cease to exist in the form of life. So that's the second type.
And with that, I was thinking of, do you know what a glaciologist does, right? Somebody who
Yep,
studies glaciers. Think
absolutely.
about somebody who's a glaciologist and that kind of anxiety, right? Where they see their glacier receding in their lifetime. They've seen their glacier recede, 100 meters or something, right? Like there's in our lifetimes where people who study that can see, I was here 1975, this is what it looked like. Now I'm here now, this is what it looks like. It's gone, right? So
Anyone my age, our age, who grew up skiing, the Lake Louise Glacier has shrunk since, and I can remember when it was bigger, exactly like you said. And that's not, some faraway story and
no,
pictures from someplace I don't know.
yeah,
As a kid, my dad taught skiing at Lake Louise, and I skied there. And I remember taking the glacier tour, and I remember seeing it a few years ago and thinking, wow, maybe my memory's playing tricks on me, but I used to think it was over there, and
yeah.
now it's way back here. And so, yeah, we certainly are there.
Third
The other
type.
type, yes, slow violence, and that's the slow change from urban growth, from expansion. So, Calgary, right? Do you remember going into Calgary as kids, or as a kid, and the Calgary Tower was like a big building, and Calgary was fairly centralized. The exhibition grounds were kind of on the edge of town ish. And now you go, and the thing is spread out forever. And I know when I drive in there, I always remember all the beautiful fields that are now paved under, right? Being a farm kid, there's a sense of loss to me there.
Sure. Yeah.
And how Calgary instead of spreading up, it spreads out. And
Yeah.
there's a sense of loss there, and it's a long, slow, painful loss, but it's definitely there. And so we feel anxiety from that. Have you
Got it.
felt that in your own way? Have you seen it around this area? I mean, you grew up here.
I don't know. You're calling it's a slow gradual one. This is number 3.
Yeah,
Slow gradual.
they call it slow violence. So
Slow violence.
it's,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
a changing sense of self in place. So you don't have the sense that you've changed, but you are aware that the environment around you, that species, like, when I grew up, the wildlife was everywhere. Like, when I first came to Lethbridge, this is a perfect example. Ted Feller took me hunting for antelope, and we just bought a tag for antelope, and we went hunting. Now, you're very lucky if you get drawn for antelope because the population has decreased in size so much. And it's not, sorry to say, people out there, it's not because of us hunters. It's because of fences that aren't conducive to the herd lifestyle of antelopes. Is because of water resources that have been fenced off and used for cattle production that are no longer available to those herds. The LFGA, Alberta Conservation Association, have had a lot of projects to help fix that and try and bring those populations back. But there's an example how, I'm very aware of loss. My daughters won't be able to hunt antelope. And I know, coming from, around Bentley, where there's lots of trees and more close to Rocky Mountain House, where we used to run some of our cattle, coming down here in the flatlands and hunting an antelope on flat land was an incredible experience for me. And to think about how Indigenous peoples from this area, how their experience was so different than, the first people in my area, where, the buffalo jump and things here, where the source of food could see you coming for miles, where I grew up, there's heavy tree cover and it's a lot easier to hunt because they can't see you from so far away, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, those experiences are a sense in your own person that things are getting worse around you in reality, right? And that can be animal, it can be environment, drought. There used to be a lot more water in areas, and now there's not. Things that would grow and aren't growing, invasive species, all of those things fit into that category, right?
Sure.
Okay, and then the last one is what they call anticipatory grief. And this is one of the ones that affects children the most. And I think it's one of the ones that we really need to find. If we want hope for the future, we need to find a way not to burden young people with anticipatory grief. And that's anxiety thinking about what's to come. So not necessarily thinking about the wildfire and the destruction that's happening right now, but when you're talking about global climate change and the realities. And I know Al Gore put out, what was the name of his movie that he put out? Inconvenient Truth.
Yeah, An Inconvenient Truth. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Right. And there was a few of those that became very popular and families were watching them. And, it's important to share this information with your kids. And I'm not saying it's not, but if you look at it from the angle we're talking about in tonight's show, there's a lot of anticipatory grief there, right? That idea that if we don't do something immediately, all of this destruction and death and fundamental changes to human existence are going to occur. I know I've listened to news programs, read articles where people are talking about basic extinction level events occurring because of climate change. Imagine if you're a 7, 8, 9-year-old, 15-year-old kid who's being bombarded with the information that the world as you know it is going to end, that we're going to face something at the level of the meteors that wiped out the dinosaurs, but of our own causing.
Yeah.
Even if it's not, who cares who caused it?
Yeah.
The stress associated with that. I'm not saying I don't care who caused it, but
No.
At some level we have to recognize that grief.
Yeah.
So
I
you
mean,
throw
really,
all,
it's sort of an acceleration of, if you think about your personal life, you can be in this moment and enjoy this moment. You can be in the past and regretting what you did or said or should have done and didn't do, or you could be in the future worrying about what's going to happen because, that it's sort of the same thing as that, right? If you're thinking of the future and you're not making any preparations for a better future tomorrow, well, then the future looks pretty damn scary, right? Like that would be how if I was a little person, that's kind of how I would look at it, right? Well, that's how I look at it as
exactly.
now.
As a big person, yeah.
As a big person.
And so what I saw through all this research is that we really can't deny that there's a mental crisis going on here. And that's not to just add to the weight of all the mental health issues we have going on, but mental health, I think that in all our time as brothers in hope here, mental health is complex, but it's also simple in that many of these things are connected, right? So eco grief has a lot of parallels to being scared of dying, to being scared of violence. When the environment is destructive and kills and indiscriminately. I think of the typhoons that hit Thailand, that hit Japan, and how innocent people were here one minute and gone the next, and they did nothing to deserve that.
Sure. Yeah.
It, you know, and the impact on people. And I think there really needs to be for two big problems. One is that obviously these problems are too big to be solved in your and my lifetime. We can start the round of golf really well. We can get things teed up. We can get us out on the green. But it's going to be the next generation, and maybe the one after that or the one after that. They're going to really either suffer through the consequences or find a solution. So our hope,
following your analogy, let's not blow up the damn golf course then, at least. Like, let's let them have something to work with when they get to that part, right? So
yeah, and let's not burden. Let's find a way to make sure that the people we're putting our hope in are mentally healthy enough to deal with the situation. And so that's what sort of come out of all of this is, for me, is we talk about solutions, and we fight about, isn't it, whose fault is it, are we doing this, is it normal climate cycle? But we don't stop and say, hey, you know what, we really need to think about how this whole conversation is affecting the people we're putting hope in to solve it. Are we burdening them with a whole bunch of mental health issues and not providing them? I know that teachers teach about climate change, and they teach about disasters, but have they been equipped to understand how this is affecting the child psychology? No.
So next week, Scott, I understand we're going to be looking at ways that we can help people navigate their eco grief. Is that correct?
100%, my friend. That's exactly what's going on. And that's our segue, because the more I looked into this, the more I realized it does affect a lot of people, and it does affect families. And, it's caused stress in my own family. And, when the whole Greta thing was going on, there was a lot of people demonstrating and arguing and fighting, and kids were being sort of thrust into it. Kids, I saw news video of kids holding signs that they obviously didn't write. Maybe they understood it in a rudimentary way, but it was obviously an adult that was projecting their thoughts onto the child and using the child to represent those thoughts. And I'm not judging that, but I'm saying that obviously has impact on that child. And so there's along with the hope for the future, I think we have to be really aware of the mental health danger in not looking at healthy ways to deal with the grief, with the fear, with the anxiety that comes from not only the one of events, which, like you said, governments are pretty good at dealing with things that have just happened, kind of, but they're much better at dealing with them than things that might happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things that might happen usually get pushed to somebody else's budget, somebody else's, term in office.
Exactly.
And so I think this is all coming to the point that we have to do something, not just about the issue, but about the negative impact, the mental health issues that this can cause if they're not addressed, if we don't provide relief, if we don't provide mechanisms, if we don't talk about it with our kids. Is this making you feel stressful? Are you feeling like you need some help with this? You're very passionate. I meet young people that are very concerned about lots of things, but you know the environment is a big one, especially there's a particular age group, and I think it's from school, and like you said, they're starting to move from the me to the broader sense of being part of the human race. And do we ask them, how are you doing there? Are you, I understand you feel really strongly about this and you want to see change, but how are you dealing with the stress that's causing you? Are
Mhm.
you aware that it's causing you stress?
So
And so that's the kind
week,
of things.
next
Go ahead.
week, I'm looking forward to what you've got planned for us next week, Brother Scott. So eco eco grief, it's an issue. We've addressed it a little bit, outlined what it is. Next week, we're going to be talking about how we might ameliorate the eco grief that we might be experiencing in our lives. Would that be a fair statement, Scott?
Absolutely. And if anyone out there wants to leave some comments for us, let's not get into a flame war about, is it, isn't it? Let's leave that aside. Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about what we can do to make sure that the people in our community are at their very best and have hope in their hearts and are facing each day with the greatest reserve of hope, happiness, and health, because that's what it's all about. Right, Brother Alan?
Perfect. Well said, sir. So next week, we'll have another chat. Looking forward to seeing you all then. I'm going to be in Lethbridge by then, I'm sure. I would hope.
Yay. Well, good luck. Good luck to Corolla. Is Sugar there? Who's she riding today?
Yeah, she rode Sugar today. She's going to compete on JJ tomorrow. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah.
And JJ's the up and comer. He's the sort of new one.
Yeah, he's the newest one that she's working with. So, yeah, Sugar's kind
Great.
of been a couple of years and JJ's more new. So,
Well, good luck to JJ and Corolla tomorrow, and
Joey, not
always, my
JJ.
friend.
Joey. I screwed up the name
Joey.
of the horse.
Oh.
Joey's the horse.
Uh-oh.
So,
Well, good luck to Joey. Sorry, Corolla.
okay.
Sorry, Joey. And you take care, my friend,
You
and
too.
enjoy some of that nice sunshine I see in your background. Take
Sounds good.
care.
Keep